Welcome to a production of the Sweetwater County Historical Museum. Today's presentation is on Constitution Day. The Constitution is the highest law of the United States of America, granting all of the governmental powers. Constitution Day is celebrated on September 17th. The same day the Constitution was signed. The modern Constitution was not the first version, though. Before that was a document called the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union. Like the modern Constitution, this established a government that was in place until the modern Constitution was ratified in 1789. It was very different from the Constitution as we know it. In it, each state got one vote to make decisions that impacted all of the states. For anything to happen, at least 9 states had to vote for it, out of 13. They had very little powers, too. Mostly the states could make agreements and make money, but only the states themselves could collect taxes. The articles could be changed if every single state agreed, so you can guess how often they got changed. Yeah, they never did. The U.S. Constitution was created when men representing the states met together at an event called the Constitutional Convention. They met to try and determine the best ways to create a document that would replace the Articles of Confederation. They were working to create what we would now recognize as the Constitution. The convention ran from May 25th to September 17th, 1787 in Philadelphia. The goal was supposedly to make changes to the Articles of Confederation, but many of the participants, especially James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, had always intended to create a new government entirely. James Madison became the 4th president. Alexander Hamilton became that one guy from the musical. Well, that and the first treasurer of the United States. The people who attended the convention, called delegates, elected George Washington to preside over the convention. You know, this guy. He was the first president of the United States, if you don't count the guys from the Continental Congress, and nobody really does. Once the convention began, the delegates first agreed on the principles of the convention. Then they agreed on Madison's Virginia plan and began to modify it. A committee of detail assembled during the July 4th recess and produced a rough draft. The draft version looked pretty similar to the final version. After the final issues were resolved, the Committee on Style produced the final version, and it was voted on and sent to the states. Generally, the delegates agreed on a few things, namely that there should be 3 branches of government and what the powers of those branches should be. The legislative should make the laws, the executive should run the government, and the judicial branch should punish those who break the laws. The main arguments were on the composition and election of the Senate, how proportional representation was to be defined, namely, whether slaves or other property should count. Ultimately, they determined slaves counted as 3/5 of the person, known as the 3/5 Compromise. Whether to divide the executive power between 3 persons or invest the power into a single president. They ultimately picked 1. How to elect the president. The big question was whether the president should be picked by a majority of the people. They eventually decided to have the president voted on by an electoral college, a group of specially picked people. How long the president's term should be, and whether he could stand for re-election. Some wanted him to be elected for life. Ultimately, they went with 4-year terms. What offenses should be impeachable? Their decision was vague enough it is still debated today. The nature of a fugitive slave clause and whether to allow the abolition of the slave trade. They ultimately decided that states could be created as non-slave states. 75 years later, the Emancipation Proclamation and the Civil War would ultimately result in the official abolition of slavery. Whether judges should be chosen by the legislature or the executive. They ultimately decided kind of both. Judges are nominated by the president, and Congress gets to confirm them. One big difference that the new Constitution had was it changed how voting worked. The U.S. is a direct democracy, right? Like ancient Greece? Actually, not quite. Generally, the United States is a democratic republic. That means we vote for people who represent us and who vote on our behalf. The majority of delegates at the Constitutional Convention decided to make the Constitution federalist. This means that usually the federal government is more important and powerful than the state government. However, this is meant to be balanced by the fact that all of the powers not explicitly granted to the federal government are given to state and local governments. Each state is essentially a separate mini-nation, hence the name state, as in nation-state, with its own laws and its own government, with all of the states bound under one big nation, the United States. We call this big government the federal government. As a result, powers like the creation of new states and most major decisions are made by the states through their elected representatives in Congress. For example, the Constitution explicitly requires a separation of church and state, and bans the federal government from using taxes to fund a national religion. However, several states had official religions as late as 1830. Their own constitutions and laws determine what is allowed within each state. The Constitution decides what that federal government looks like. Generally, the Constitution divides the government into three big sections, called branches, and each branch has different powers and different authorities. One branch is the executive branch. Like the executive of a company, the executive branch runs the country and implements the laws, figuring out how things work. The President of the United States is in charge of the executive branch. The President and Vice President are elected together, and then the President picks the members of his cabinet. The citizens vote for the President, but the votes that elect the President are, by the Constitution, the Electoral College. This is over 500 specific people who decide which candidate to elect as President. Generally, they are expected, but not always required, to vote for whom the people of their state did. This does mean the president can technically lose the popular vote and still win the election. The Constitution also requires that the president be over 35 and a natural-born citizen. The legislative branch is made up of what is called a bicameral legislature, meaning it has two chambers. The House of Representatives is the lower house, and the Senate is the upper house. The House of Representatives has more people because each state has a number of representatives related to its population. Wyoming has one representative in the House. The House has the authority to impeach officials, including the president. The Constitution also lays out requirements such as the age of potential congresspeople and how long they must have been a citizen. The Senate is the upper house, and each state has two senators. Until 1913, senators, as per the Constitution, were not directly elected by the people. Today, senators are elected by ballot in each state. The Senate is the only body that can try officials who have been impeached. If convicted at their impeachment, the only punishments the Constitution says the Senate can give are removal from office and banning the official from holding a future office. Most impeachments, and the only ones to result in them officially being convicted and removed, have been for judges. Together, we call the Senate and the House Congress. Congress makes the laws. Each law starts as a bill, a document with no power or authority. Once both houses of Congress agree and vote to pass the bill, it then gets sent to the president. If he signs the bill, it becomes a law. The last branch is the judicial branch, made up of courts. The judicial branch decides how to punish the people who break the laws. The highest and most powerful court in the United States is the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is made up of 9 judges specially picked by the President and approved by the Congress. Their primary task is to decide if what the other branches are doing is constitutional, meaning legal according to the Constitution. That one was not an ability originally laid out in the Constitution, but has become their most important role. Having 9 of them makes it virtually impossible to have a tie. Each of the 3 branches is meant to have ways to help control the other 2. No one branch has complete power or authority. The executive branch can veto laws passed by the legislative, the judiciary can block actions by the other two, and the legislative branch helps decide who gets certain positions, for example. The legislative branch can also impeach officials in the other branches. Impeachment means trying the elected official. If convicted, the only punishments the Constitution allows are removal from office and banning the official from future offices. We call these abilities checks and balances. The Constitution can be changed. In fact, it was changed 27 times before the year 2020. These changes are called amendments. The first 10 amendments are called the Bill of Rights. These rights include the First Amendment, which grants freedom of speech, religion, and the right to assemble, and the Fifth Amendment, which grants rights such as the right to due process and avoid incriminating yourself. Other amendments include the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote, and the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. Can you think of any ways the Constitution impacts your life? And do you think it's important for a bunch of high schoolers in Wyoming to celebrate Constitution Day? The Constitution continues to guide the core of the United States government, and the state of Wyoming recognizes that importance every year on September 17th. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to keep paying attention in all of your classes so that you can continue learning. And remember, if you are interested, there's always more videos to watch on our YouTube channel.